Well, Bob, I'm honored that you asked me to do this little interview.
Well, thanks.
We've known each other for so many years.
Yeah, like 4 decades.
I, yeah, please. It goes by pretty fast, though, doesn't it? Yeah, I think, as you just told me, the first time I met you was when you first came to the symphony. And we did, you reminded me of that piece we did with the then conductor, Rujen Kojin, which was the Bach Concerto for Violin and Oboe.
Yeah,
And I think we have a photo of that, might be showing
yeah,
right now, with the conductor playing and you and me back in the very old days.
yeah.
Speaking of the very old days, I wanted to ask you about music and what was your first memory of latching on to music? What caught your ear as a young kid, if you can remember?
Well, before I even heard music, my family was at Interlochen, Michigan, where there's a music camp there.
Hmm.
And my father was on the faculty there for maybe 57 years. And it was something he really loved and looked forward to every summer.
I didn't realize that he was there that long.
Yeah.
And what was his instrument?
Well, he was a wonderful singer, but he was a theater director.
Oh,
And so
right.
he was in charge of directing the Gilbert and Sullivan operettas.
Oh, that's a
And he did it for what was called the intermediate division, which was like junior high, and then the high school division.
what a wonderful introduction to music.
Yeah.
So,
So consequently, I know most of the Gilbert and Sullivan operettas.
well, I can't say that. Can you spit out those lyrics?
Little pitter patter.
Yeah. So that was basically, you were just surrounded by music.
Yeah, but Interlochen's unique in that it's not just about music there. There's dance, a theater, of course, music, and the visual arts. So it's all inclusive, I would say. And besides that, we had a cabin on the lake, and it's where I learned how to swim, boat, sail, fish, ski, just everything you do in the water.
Beautiful. I
Oh,
mean,
yeah, it's
yeah.
idyllic.
If that is coupled in my memory with music, which it kind of is too, because I grew up on a lake too. But
Huh.
I'm very curious about how you started with the oboe. I mean, the oboe is so labor intensive with the reed making and everything.
Yeah.
How'd you get started on that instrument?
Well, most oboe players, when they get started on the oboe, they don't know anything about reed making. But I was fortunate enough to take a class. It was called Talent Exploration. And it was a class that allowed me to play every instrument in the orchestra. And I did it between the second and third grade, so maybe I was about 8 years old, something like that. And for 1 week, you might play all the stringed instruments. Another week, all the woodwinds. Another week, the percussion. Another week, the brass. And after those 4 weeks, we were asked to tell them what we might want to play for an entire week. And there were 2 more weeks that the class would go, so I had to pick 2 instruments. And my parents, I think, were secretly hoping that I would pick the oboe. And the night before we were to tell them, my father and I went to a concert, and an oboe player was playing, and he leaned over to me and says, "Bob, doesn't that sound cool?" And so, he was influencing me at an early age. I had an older brother that was already playing the clarinet, and those are probably some of my early musical memories of him just playing and practicing the clarinet. And the instructors thought that I would be a good percussionist because I had decent rhythm or whatever it was. But my mom said she didn't want any percussion
Right.
instruments, no drums in the house, so she was hoping I would pick something else.
Well, you have one more year left with the symphony
Yeah.
when the symphony finally gets back to work. And so if anybody is wondering what Bob's doing when he's just sitting there like this, he's not knitting. He's carving reeds and working on reeds
Yeah.
constantly.
Yeah, I started that when I was quite young. I was like an experiment for my first teacher. He himself was a university professor, and he thought that it was possible to teach a young person how to make reeds. So I was the guinea pig, and I began learning how to make reeds when I was probably in the fourth grade.
Wow.
Yeah,
Well, that's fortunate because
yeah, yeah, it was like,
it is an endless art.
yeah.
Endless art. So moving on, then you moved on through music. You went to school. What was your first professional job as a
Well, even
musician?
when I was in school, I was able to freelance. I went to school in Philadelphia, a school called Curtis, and I had opportunities to play in community groups. I was in the Lancaster Symphony, for instance, several other smaller groups. But my first job really wasn't until after I graduated, and I auditioned for the Savannah Symphony, and I ended up being the principal oboe there for 3 years.
It's a long time.
Yeah, but I loved it.
Yeah, and you liked Savannah.
So Savannah's a beautiful,
It is.
beautiful city. Yeah.
And then you decided to try an audition for the Utah Symphony.
Yeah, I was at the Blossom Music Festival. I was studying with John Mack, who was a longtime principal oboe with the Cleveland Orchestra, and he himself had gone to Curtis, and we had a relationship before because even when I was in high school, I was going to Cleveland and taking lessons from Mr. Mack, and so I came out here, and strangely enough, it was July the 24th. And I thought I was staying at the hotel across from what was then a relatively new Abravanel Hall. And I looked outside my window, and there were some stagecoaches and some people dressed in pioneer garb. And I thought, wow, this is a wonderful place to be. You know, the day of my audition, there's a parade. So the audition was I had taken several auditions before, but this one was maybe unique in that out of all the players that were auditioning, and I think there were maybe between 70 and 75, I was the first one to play. And so that's kind of a difficult spot to be in, possibly, but maybe it made me a little less nervous than I might have been ordinarily. I played that first round, and they asked me to come back and play again in the afternoon, and so I played again in the afternoon. The auditions itself went on for 2 days. I went back to Blossom, Kent State, the university there where the students are and the faculty teaches. And it wasn't until the next day that I got a call from Varujin Kojin, who was the new music director, and he offered me the job.
That's wonderful.
Yeah.
I mean, you must have been happy.
Oh yeah, I was very happy. I knew that it was going to mean, a bigger spotlight, more money. The orchestra had a reputation for recording, for touring, and things like that. Those were all things that I was interested in doing.
During those first few months, how we don't have to talk long about this, but I'm curious for people who might be wondering, what's it like to settle in with a group of 80 other people and get used to each other little bit by little bit? For you, how were those first few months with the symphony?
Well, I loved it, to tell you the truth.
Well, yeah.
And I had wonderful colleagues. I was sitting next to Eric Groff, who I really admired. Strangely enough, Eric was also from Ann Arbor, Michigan, where I grew up, and his parents knew my grandmother quite well, and so I had this little connection. Besides that, I didn't really know too many other people. Richard Stout, if you remember that name, a violinist.
I was next door neighbor to Richard for years, yeah.
Well, Richard and I were more or less the same age, and I knew him from hearing him play the Cacciatorian violin concerto when he was younger. And so really I only knew a couple people, but my father always told me, well, get to know people's names. So even before I came to the orchestra, I had a roster list, and I tried to learn everybody's name even before I came. And people were very friendly, and almost every week we were playing a new program. It was quite varied. At that time, the orchestra was playing not only with the opera company, but also with the ballet. So the thing about being an orchestra musician is partly the variety that makes it so interesting. We do pops concerts, film concerts nowadays. The orchestra plays indoors, outdoors, and with all other different kind of soloists and groups and things like that. So it's very colorful. And I really love that about it.
The variety.
The variety, yeah.
Yeah, every week a new program.
Yeah,
Pretty
right.
much.
Yeah, oftentimes a different conductor.
Yeah.
And maybe even you're sitting next to different colleagues. You know, there's some kind of rotations that can happen. So, you know, I sit next to any variety of people because of the repertoire and because of the rotations that might be involved.
Well, before I want to talk about your composition because that's taking even more major role in your activities. But before that, because of all the variety, can you what would you consider to be one of your favorite orchestral pieces, or a couple of them that? So, what appeals to you in that world of 80 people surrounded by 80 people making music?
Well, that's really a tough question because I love so much music, from the Baroque to even the modern. I think maybe there's a special thrill when we do things like Mahler or Strauss because it's so colorful. There's so much beautiful playing in different sections within the orchestra. If you go back to something like, I just love uh, the symphonies of Haydn, for instance, or Mozart, because they're so kind of transparent, but just so beautifully formed and varied and things like that. So from the beginning all the way through the end, it's really hard to say what's my favorite piece.
It's a tough question. What's mine? I can't even pretend to address it. So anyway, as I've known you over the last several years, you've been doing more and more composing of music,
Yeah.
which is, I compose. I used to compose a lot more than I am more now, but I'm still writing. But what drew you to composition?
Well, that's a great question, but it might start with the fact that when I was in school, my teacher, whose name was John Delancey, he played for many years in the Philadelphia Orchestra, and he said to me once, you know, Bob, why don't you devise an exercise for this particular problem that most oboe players have an issue with? You know, because sometimes it's not all about the reed giving you problems, but you've got to be able to move the fingers in the right way. Yeah. And so that kind of stuck with me. And then I had the occasion of playing the Mozart Oboe Concerto twice. And so I wrote cadenzas for all three of the movements from that. And so now I have two sets of cadenzas for the Mozart concerto. And then when my daughter Gretchen was taking Suzuki violin lessons from Suzanne Brimhall in the Avenues, I used to listen to her playing those Suzuki violin tunes that are so famous. And I thought, oh, wow, you know, I bet I could make something kind of interesting with that theme for the oboe. And so that's the first piece I ever really wrote was called Twinkle Variations.
I remember that piece.
And fortunately, the Southern Music Company published it, and that started me off.
You're rolling in the royalties. Well, listen, because time is a little short, you have concentrated a lot on writing etudes. You've written so many other things. I just had the opportunity to hear a quartet that you've just finished.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. But you've written a lot of etudes. For people who don't know, an etude is a study piece that, as you say, addresses one particular problem or two or whatever. But I'm just impressed. You have books and books of etudes.
Yeah, isn't that crazy? I started what might have been, you know, maybe 15, 20 years ago. The first book I wrote just had a variety. I called it 40 Melodic and Technical Etudes. And I covered a wide range of topics. And once again, another publisher agreed to publish it. So I thought, wow, this is pretty good. I'm on a roll. So then after that, I've always been curious about the relationship between music and dance. And I thought, for instance, if I could visualize what a particular dance is, that maybe I could execute it as a player more convincingly. You know, so I went online to and saw a lot of YouTube videos and that kind of thing, and I got in my ear. I thought at first, well, maybe there are 30, 35 different dances. Well, I ended up writing 72 because there are many more dances than you might imagine. And so in watching videos like that, you get the visual idea of maybe movement, of speed, of inflection, all kinds of things like that. Hesitation, speeding through and things like that. So that was the origin of writing. I went way back
Yeah.
to like early dance forms, and went through the Renaissance, the Baroque, the classical periods, until I think the last one I wrote was called the Stomp, and I wrote that in an octatonic scale. So sometimes I try to combine elements of music in
And
that
I'm
way.
aware of some of those because you've been showing me along as they sort of trickle out
Well,
in an endless stream. So listen, we need to talk about the Etude project in that regard. What is the Etude project, and how are we able to take advantage of that continuing series of performances?
well, the Etude project came about because of the pandemic. We had some free time on our hands, and I thought it might be a nice gesture to my woodwind colleagues if I gave each one of them one of my books. And because I have 5 books, I was distributing a variety of themes and subjects related to the books. And then there's some committee, and someone was saying, well, they heard that I had these books. Maybe we could do something related to Bob's music. Trying to keep the music alive.
Yes.
It's rather important nowadays because people don't come to concerts in the same way. So I distributed the books, and I had let's see, 9 of my colleagues say that they'd be happy to be a part of it. So they all chose an etude from either that dance etude book, the 40 melodic and technical exercises, quotation exercises, which is a book where I was trying to recreate the sound of other composers. I've always been fascinated. Why does Mozart sound like Mozart? Or Vivaldi, Strauss, Mozart, or Mahler, something like that, And so during the sabbatical, I worked hard at listening again and trying to get in my ear the sound and the unique feeling that we have with certain composers. The um, the sabbatical made it possible for Lisa, my wife, who plays flute in the orchestra, to come with me, and we heard like 81 orchestra concerts. We heard a lot of pieces I'd never heard before by Dvorak. The first time I'd ever heard Electra, and I thought, wow, there's his voice. That's Strauss's voice. So I knew that it was an interesting subject. And then the other book is called Rhythm, Time, and Meter, because I've always been fascinated by the fact that much of music has mathematical relationships. We talk about time signature. We talk about speed with a metronome. There's so many different factors that go into music that have to do with numbers.
Mm-hmm.
And so I wrote another book about that. And so my 9 other colleagues and I have agreed to play the different etudes in different locations and different subjects and that kind of thing. We wanted to, among other things, develop a kind of connection that as musicians we have with the state, the city, and even each other.
Right.
And so I'm eager for the public to hear it. And,
how do we hear it?
Well, it's going to show itself and be heard through the musician's website.
Oh,
Yeah,
so it's not the Utah Symphony website.
it's more the Utah Symphony musicians website.
Is that the name of the website?
I think that's what it's called. Yeah.
Okay. And that starts, didn't you tell me it starts
Soon.
right away? Yeah.
I want to say in the next week, you might hear the very first one. And just because I was ready, I happened to be the first one. And the piece I chose to play was called The Birds. And I actually filmed it outside in our backyard. And you can actually hear the sound of birds as I'm playing the oboe d'amore. One of the other things about the project is I thought it would be interesting to introduce some other instruments. So Caitlin's going to play the piccolo, for instance, and Aaron's going to play the E-flat clarinet, and I'm playing the oboe d'amore. So there's variety in not just the music, but even the instruments being used.
I want to thank you for, I mean, I'm realizing we could go on for a long time,
That's okay.
but I don't think that your wife has enough time on her camera phone.
Oh,
Anyway, so we're going to be looking for that. So we would encourage people to go to the Musicians of the Utah Symphony, is at the website,
yeah.
and check out what's there. There's a lot of stuff there, especially now because we're putting so much stuff online. But Bob, thank you so much for sitting down with me, and I'm finding out things I never knew after all these years. Thank you.
Thank you, Rick.